I was nervous about the exposed position, but I'd slept in more dangerous places. Before I did anything else, I chose a spot in the river where the water divided neatly around a large rock and set up a trap with a shirt tied and half buried in place. A slim chance of catching fish was better than none at all. I strengthened it with rosemary sprigs tugged from the rocks, stripping the leaves first for when I had something to cook, and rearranged some stones to guide the fish into my trap. Once I'd given it a good looking over to check it would hold, I decided it wouldn't hold much, and not for long. I twisted the rosemary twigs into a flag that would bob around when I caught something. I sat a little distance away and prepared a fire while keeping half an eye on the water. The fire was burning merrily when my rosemary flag twitched, and I leapt to my feet just in time to see a nice meaty pike spot me and twist away to the other side of the anchoring rock. Furious, I banked my fire and sat back by the water, breathing slowly to keep from moving until the right moment. A silver bream sniffed around before shying away, and I almost wept. At last a foot-long pike swam right into my shirt and promptly got itself tangled in the folds. I dove for it with a furious yell and hauled my squirming catch up onto the rocks, tearing off the sleeve of my shirt at the same time. Once I had the fabric and fish separated, I threw the fish whole onto my fire, where it made a right mess of the embers before it gave itself up, and I was able to rebuild the fire and cook it properly, sprinkled with rosemary leaves. I decided to reset the trap while I waited. When my pike was done, I dumped it back in the water to cool it enough to eat right away, and tossed the fins and head back into the water to serve as bait. By the time I'd finished eating, there were 2 more fish waiting for me. I knocked the fish out on the rocks and bundled them back in my ruined shirt for later, hanging the shirt like a bag in the water so they'd stay fresh and not attract trouble with their smell. After that, I was running out of fuel for the fire, and it was too dark to do much about it, so I huddled under an overhang and kicked the remains of the fire into a warm barrier against the world. I gathered my things and attempted to conquer the rocky wall. I failed so quickly the embers of the fire were still warm, and I was able to restore them before dumping my fish back into the cool water for the night. The smoke made me cough, but it kept the bugs away, and I woke refreshed at first light. One of the fish had been carried off in the night, but the other was still there. Breakfast was a cheerful task to get out of the way before I took a good hard look at the cliff. I told myself the choice to climb the southern cliff was absolutely not because of the voice in my head. I'd always liked the south, all the way to the ocean where on a clear day I could see across the channel and see France, where my mother was born. Knox had chased her to Britain, inadvertently saving us from a series of failed post-revolution uprisings. France had been a bloody place to live during that time, though I knew better than to say such things to Mother. I sighed and shook off the fear that I'd never get my chance to annoy her again. The cliff was smoother than I liked, old and lined with sediment, showing that it had been a long time since it had changed at all. The good news, for me, was that it was packed with small pockets of dirt that had eventually become host to a variety of weeds and even small determined trees. Here and there the growth of the slender roots had managed to chisel away sections of the rock, leaving useful depressions where I could grip on, assuming there weren't any new sections ready to fall away. A crack big enough to hold a weed was most likely deep enough and strong enough for my fingers. I sighed and balanced my things carefully on my back, taking another long drink before I started my climb. My fingers stiffened almost at once. It had been too long. Too bad. I took my time testing each hand and foothold before trusting them and never moving more than one limb at a time. "Hello there," called someone below me. I managed to glance downwards and saw a man carrying an array of pots and pans. "Hello," I said. "What are you climbing that cliff for?" he called. It seemed like a good idea," I said. "Why don't you come down?" he said. "I'm not that far from the top now," I called back. "You have such beautiful soles," he said. I began to realize he wasn't the innocent traveller he appeared to be. "Are you a great one?" I asked. "I just want to talk to you," he said. "You glow, and I'm so hungry." I didn't understand what was going on, but the man hungering after my souls was less frightening than the voice in my head. When I was getting tauntingly close to the top, I smelled raw meat. It didn't mean anything. I told myself the voice in my head was imaginary, and so was the smell, but I moved faster all the same. I reached the top at the same time as the rising sun, and was blinded the instant my face peeked over the lip of the rock. Something screamed at me, and I ducked instinctively, crouching on the cliff's edge, with all my muscles screaming.